What happens when prejudice and power collide at 30,000 feet? A gate agent at a busy international airport sees a black couple in simple clothes carrying what she calls cheap bags. She decides to make an example of them, laughing in their faces and refusing them entry. But she's about to learn a lesson in humility that will cost her everything. Because what she doesn't know is that those cheap bags contain state secrets, and the couple she's mocking aren't just passengers, they're diplomats, and their security escort is already on the way. The silence that follows her laughter is deafening, and the karma is just getting started. The fluorescent lights of John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 buzzed with a specific kind of mundane misery. It was the sound of delays, of anxiety, of recycled air that smelled faintly of Cinnabon and jet fuel. At gate B24, the atmosphere was particularly tense. The 7:10 p.m. non-stop to Geneva Transatlantic Airlines Flight 112 was now delayed until 9:45 p.m. The electronic board flashed the update with unapologetic red letters, and a collective groan had rippled through the waiting area an hour ago, long since settling into a sour, simmering impatience. Seated near the window, away from the main cluster of disgruntled travelers, were Ambassador David Harris and his senior analyst, Elena Vance. To the untrained eye, they were just another couple. David wore a simple, dark grey Henley and comfortable black travel pants. Elena was in a plain, navy blue knit sweater and dark jeans. They looked more like university professors than high-level government assets. And then there were their bags. They each had a standard, rolling carry-on for their personal items. But their at-foot bags were what drew the eye, if only for their utter lack of distinction. They were not the sleek, Toomey briefcases or leather Louis Vuitton keepalls that littered the business-class waiting area. They were simple, almost military-issue canvas duffels. One was olive green, the other a faded black. They were clean but worn, with no logos and simple, heavy-duty brass zippers. They looked, to anyone who cared to notice, unequivocally cheap. David and Eleanor didn't notice the looks, or rather, they were trained to notice and ignore them. They spoke in low, measured tones. The initial cyber threat assessment from the attache in Bern was incomplete, Eleanor murmured, looking at her phone screen, which was angled for privacy. They completely missed the back-channel communication between the two non-state actors. They always do, David said, his eyes scanning the crowd. It was a habit he couldn't break. He wasn't just looking, he was assessing. They look for the explosion, not the fuse. That's why we're going. The finance ministers will only listen if we can prove the entire banking network is compromised. And that proof, Elena said, tapping the black canvas duffel at her feet, is right here. The cheap bag was, in reality, a custom-fabricated D-Pouch 7. It was Kevlar-lined, waterproof, and fire-resistant, containing a set of encrypted hard drives and physical dossiers that held the key to preventing a global economic crisis. The olive bag at David's feet held the matching cryptographic keys and communication hardware. They were, quite possibly, the two most valuable bags in the entire airport, disguised as thrift store finds. Their quiet bubble of strategy was burst by a sharp, nasal voice that cut through the terminal's hum. "People, I need you to clear the walkway. This is not your living room. Move your children and move your bags." The voice belonged to Brenda Jenkins, the lead gate agent for TA 112. Brenda ruled Gate B24 with the iron-fisted tyranny of someone who despised their job but loved the sliver of power it afforded. She was a woman in her late 40s, her airline-issued uniform stretched taut over her frame, her blonde hair pulled into a severe bun. She saw the world in a binary of first class and cattle, and she had long ago decided she was on the side of the former, even if her paycheck disagreed. She paced the small, carpeted area, her eyes scanning the passengers with open disdain. She saw the weary families, the annoying college students, the businessmen she simultaneously fawned over and resented. Her gaze landed on David and Eleanor. She saw a black couple, dressed down, sitting quietly, and she saw their bags. Her lip curled. Another pair, she thought, trying to sneak oversized, falling-apart luggage onto the plane so they don't have to pay the checked bag fee. She'd seen it 1,000 times. It was a personal affront to her authority. She marched over. David and Elena looked up as the sharp scent of her hairspray preceded her. "You two," she snapped, not waiting for an answer. "Those duffels will not be coming on board. They're clearly oversized, and they look unsanitary. You'll need to go back to the check-in counter and pay the fee." David, who had negotiated arms treaties and faced down warlords, simply held her gaze. His calm was a fortress. "Ma'am, these are our carry-on items. They are compliant with all airline regulations." "I'm the one who decides what's compliant," Brenda retorted, her voice rising. "And I'm telling you, those cheap things aren't coming on my plane. I don't want them breaking apart in the overhead bin." Elena, a woman who could break 256-bit encryption in her sleep, felt a familiar, cold prickle of anger. It was the cheap that did it. The condescension. But she, like David, was a professional. She remained perfectly still. "We will not be checking these bags," David said, his voice polite but unyielding. "They will remain with us." Brenda's face flushed a blotchy red. "Oh, you will not?" she mocked. "We'll see about that. I'm noting your seats. When boarding starts, you're going to be the first ones I check. Don't even try to get past me." She spun on her heel and marched back to her podium, already typing furiously into her terminal. She was flagging their seats, 1A and 1C. "The audacity," she fumed. "They probably used some third-party site to get a cheap upgrade, and now they're acting like they own the place." David let out a long, slow breath. "The camouflage, Elena. Sometimes it's a little too effective." "She's a problem, David," Elena said quietly. "She's just a person, and a miserable one at that," David replied. "She'll scan the passports. The system will verify us, and we'll be on our way. This is just noise." But as they watched Brenda continue to patrol her gate, snapping at a young mother, and then fawning over a man in a Rolex whose bag was actually oversized, David felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just a noise. This was an obstacle, and in their line of work, a simple obstacle, mishandled, could quickly become a catastrophic one. At 9:35 p.m., the tension at gate B24 was a palpable thing. Brenda Jenkins grabbed the microphone, her voice amplified and sharp. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We will finally be commencing boarding for transatlantic flight 112 to Geneva. Please have your boarding passes and passports ready." She exuded a frazzled, impatient energy, as if the delay were the passenger's fault. "We will be boarding by groups, starting with our first-class passengers, our Platinum Medallion members, and any active-duty military personnel. We will also pre-board those needing special assistance and families with small children." David and Eleanor stood up, gathering their things. Their tickets, issued by the State Department, had a specific code that granted them pre-boarding status, regardless of class, to ensure the security of their sensitive materials. It was standard protocol. "Now," Brenda continued, her eyes sweeping the crowd and landing, as if by magnet, on David and Eleanor, "I want to remind everyone about our baggage policy. We are operating a full flight. Any bag that does not fit in the sizer will be gate-checked. This especially applies to unconventional luggage." She looked directly at them. We are not responsible for personal items, and frankly, I've seen some bags here tonight that look like they won't survive the flight. Do us all a favor and check them now." A few passengers chuckled. David and Elena's faces remained impassive. They began to walk toward the boarding lane, joining a woman in a wheelchair and a young family. Brenda, seeing them approach, held up her hand like a traffic cop. "Whoa, whoa, where do you two think you're going? I haven't even called Group 1 yet." "We are pre-boarding," David said simply, holding out his passport and ticket. Brenda actually laughed. It was a short, barking sound that was utterly devoid of humor. "Pre-boarding. I'm sorry, are you in a wheelchair I can't see? Do you have a screaming infant?" "No. You're Group 2. She pointed at their tickets, which she hadn't even looked at. "Now, step aside and wait for your turn, and you'd better have those things." She gestured to the canvas duffels. "Ready for me to tag." The line behind them was growing. The first-class passengers, impeccably dressed and smelling of expensive perfume, were beginning to cluster, annoyed by the delay. "Mum," Elena spoke for the first time, her voice low and clear. "We were instructed by the airline to pre-board. If you would just scan our passports, you will see the authorization." Brenda's eyes narrowed. She hated being challenged, especially by someone she had already dismissed. "Listen, honey, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm the one in charge of this flight. You're not special. You're just holding up the actual first-class passengers." A woman behind them, draped in a fur stole despite the mild weather, huffed. "Honestly, can we get on with this? I have a Louis Vuitton hat box here, and I'd like to get it stowed." Brenda's entire demeanor changed. She beamed at the woman. "Of course, Mrs. Davenport. My apologies. Some people just don't understand the rules." She turned back to David and Eleanor, her face hardening. "Now I'm telling you for the last time, get out of the line and give me those bags to tag." She reached out, her hand aiming for the strap of David's olive duffel. It was a mistake that would redefine her life. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't move fast. He simply shifted his body, interposing himself between Brenda and the bag. He raised his hand, palm out, in a universal stop gesture. But it was the look in his eyes that made Brenda freeze. The gentle, professorial calm was gone. In its place was something ancient and absolute. "Do not touch the bag." His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the din of the terminal. Every passenger in the immediate vicinity went silent. The air crackled. Brenda's face went from red to a pale, mottled white. She had been defied, publicly, by them. The rage that flooded her system was so potent it made her shake. "Security!" she shrieked, grabbing the radio from her belt. "Security to gate B24! I have aggressive passengers! Assault! They're refusing to follow instructions!" Elena closed her eyes for a brief second. So much for noise. This was now a full-blown incident. "Sir, you just threatened a member of my staff," Brenda was yelling now, playing to the crowd. "You are being removed from this flight. You are not going to Geneva. You'll be lucky if you don't go to jail." David didn't move. He simply stood, a calm pillar in the storm of her creation, his hand still protectively near the duffel. "Mom," he said, his voice returning to a strained patience, "you are making a catastrophic error. I am imploring you to call your supervisor and scan our passports." "Oh, I'm calling my supervisor, don't you worry," Brenda spat, dialing her desk phone. "Mike, get down to B24 now. I've got 2 passengers, 1A and 1C, who just threatened me. They're being removed. Call Port Authority." She slammed the phone down and fixed David with a triumphant smirk. "You're done. You two are done." The passengers were all staring, many with their phones out, recording the drama. David and Eleanor stood isolated in a circle of judgment, their cheap bags seeming to radiate an aura of guilt. The 5 minutes it took for Mike Sullivan, the shift supervisor, to arrive at gate B24 felt like an eternity. Brenda paced back and forth behind her podium, a general telling her troops to hold the line. She'd created a spectacle and was now reveling in it. "For everyone's safety," she announced to the waiting crowd, "we are holding boarding until airport police can remove these disruptive individuals." The whispers were venomous. Can you believe them? Assaulting her, just over a bag. Mrs. Davenport, the woman in the fur stole, was loudly telling her neighbor, "It's always the ones you'd expect. No class." David and Eleanor simply stood, silent and composed. This was a new, dangerous phase of their mission. It wasn't about negotiation anymore. It was about containment. Mike Sullivan arrived, pushing through the crowd. He was a man in his late 50s, his face a roadmap of airport-induced stress. He had started as a baggage handler 30 years ago and had seen it all. He valued efficiency and de-escalation above all else. "Brenda, what in God's name is going on?" he hissed, keeping his voice low. "We're already 3 hours behind. You're holding the flight?" "Mike, thank God," Brenda said, her voice dripping with manufactured victimhood. "These two, they refused to pre-board properly. When I told them to step aside, he threatened me. He put his hands on me. This was a new, dangerous escalation of the lie." David's eyes narrowed. "That is false, sir. I never touched this woman. I only asked her not to touch our luggage." Mike looked from Brenda's histrionic face to David's unnaturally calm one. He'd managed Brenda for 6 years. He knew her reputation. He knew her prejudices. "She refused to scan our passports," Eleanor added, her voice crisp and factual. "We are traveling on diplomatic passports. We have a pre-boarding authorization for security reasons. We asked her to verify this, and she refused, insulted our luggage, and called security." Mike's blood ran a little cold. "Diplomatic passports?" Brenda scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, Mike. Look at them. They're not diplomats. They're lying to get on the plane, and their bags are falling apart. I was trying to enforce policy." Mike felt a migraine beginning. On the one hand, Brenda was a nightmare. On the other, Diplomat was the oldest lie in the book for people trying to get out of bag fees. "All right," Mike said, his voice taking on a hard edge. "Let's end this. Brenda, scan the passports. Now." "But Mike." "Now, Brenda. That's an order." Brenda's triumphant smirk returned. She was convinced this would expose them. She snatched David's dark blue passport from his hand, her thumb covering the United States of America as she jammed it into the scanner. "We'll see about this diplomat nonsense," she muttered. She scanned it. The system, which usually took a second, whirred. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. Then, the screen on Brenda's terminal flashed. It didn't flash the pleasant green, verified. It flashed a bright, jarring, crimson red. "Do not board. Do not question. Secure passenger. Await DSS assistance. Level 7. Alert." Brenda's smirk froze, then widened into a look of pure, venomous triumph. She had been right. She was the hero. "Aha!" she shouted, spinning the monitor so Mike could see. "I knew it! I knew it! They're not diplomats. They're on a watch list. They're a security threat." The blood drained from Mike Sullivan's face. Level 7? He'd never seen anything higher than a 3. Await DSS assistance. Diplomatic Security Service. Oh, God. Brenda, in her ignorance, was jubilant. "Security!" she yelled again, as 2 uniformed Port Authority police officers finally pushed their way through the crowd. "Officers, arrest them! They're flagged! They're a threat!" The officers, seeing the red screen and hearing the agent's panic, immediately tensed. They unclipped the flaps on their holsters. "Sir, ma'am," the first officer said, his voice a commanding baritone. "Please put your bags on the ground and place your hands behind your backs." The entire gate area was in an uproar. Passengers were backing away, some screaming. "No," David said. His voice was not defiant. It was a command. "We will not. We are under the protection of the United States government. We are waiting for our escort." "Sir, don't make this difficult," the officer began, stepping forward. "Officer, look at the screen," Mike Sullivan said, his voice trembling. "It says, 'Await DSS.' That's them." "What escort are you talking about, sir?" the officer demanded. "Them," Elena said, nodding toward the corridor. Everyone turned. Moving through the panicked crowd of travelers like sharks through a school of fish were two men. They wore no uniforms. They were in identical, perfectly tailored black suits, white shirts and dark ties. They wore clear earpieces and had identical American flag pins on their lapels. They moved with a speed and purpose that was terrifying. The crowd parted for them instinctively. They didn't stop to talk. They walked directly to the Port Authority officers. "We have this," the taller one said, flipping open a badge. U.S. Department of State. Diplomatic Security Service. The police officers, seeing authority that vastly superseded their own, immediately stepped back. "Yes, sir." The agent Thompson turned to Mike Sullivan. "Are you the manager?" "Yes, sir." Mike Sullivan. "Mr. Sullivan, I am Agent Thompson. This is Agent Reed. You are to clear this gate area of all non-passengers. Now." "But the flight," Mike stammered. "Your flight can wait," Agent Reed said, his voice like gravel. He then looked at Brenda, who was standing by her terminal, her mouth open, the triumphant smirk completely gone, replaced by a mask of pale confusion. Agent Thompson walked to David and Elena. The terrifying, impersonal aura vanished, replaced by one of profound deference. "Ambassador Harris, Ms. Vance, we apologize for the delay. We were alerted by your red flag check-in." David nodded. "It's a security protocol, Agent. We're aware. We just had some difficulty with the local staff." "Ambassador?" The word hit Brenda Jenkins like a physical blow. Her knees went weak. She gripped the podium to stay upright. "Ambassador? No. No, it wasn't possible." Agent Thompson heard. His head swiveled slowly, his icy gaze landing on Brenda. "Difficulty, sir?" The silence that fell over gate B24 was absolute. The passengers, the police, Mike Sullivan. Everyone was frozen, watching the interaction. Brenda Jenkins looked like she had seen a ghost. Her mind was frantically trying to reconcile the cheap bags and the simple clothes with the word ambassador. "This agent," David said, gesturing calmly at Brenda, "insisted our carry-on luggage was cheap, unsanitary, and non-compliant. She refused to scan our credentials, laughed at our request to pre-board, and accused us of lying. When I prevented her from physically seizing our bags, she accused me of assault and called the police." Agent Thompson's face remained impassive, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. He looked at Brenda. "Is this true, ma'am?" Brenda tried to speak. A small squeaking sound came out. It was the policy." "Policy?" Agent Reed stepped forward, his eyes burning with a cold fire. He was looking not at Brenda, but at the olive-green duffel bag. "Ma'am, do you have any idea what DSS stands for?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Brenda shook her head, mute. "We are the Diplomatic Security Service. We are federal agents. Our job is to protect U.S. diplomats and materials around the world. What you refer to as a cheap bag," he said, tapping the canvas duffel with his finger, is a designated D-Pouch 7. It is a classified diplomatic pouch. He let the words hang in the air. The police officers took a nervous step backward. A diplomatic pouch, Agent Reed continued, his voice dropping even lower, is protected under the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. It is inviolable. It cannot be opened, X-rayed, or seized by anyone. Not by customs, not by police, and especially not by a gate agent who doesn't like the look of it. He looked around the gate. Your policy does not supersede federal law and international treaties. You didn't just insult a passenger. You attempted to seize classified materials from a sitting United States ambassador. The word ambassador echoed again. Mrs. Davenport, in her fur stole, put a hand to her mouth. Oh my God. Brenda's entire body was shaking. I didn't know, she finally wailed. How was I supposed to know? They just looked. Like what, Mum? Elena Vance asked, her voice quiet but sharp as a razor. They looked like what? Not like your idea of an ambassador? Brenda had no answer. She had been so sure. Her prejudice had been her compass, and it had led her off a cliff. That's the point, Agent Thompson said, his voice flat. You're not supposed to know. You're supposed to do your job. You're supposed to scan the passport. The system is designed to work. The red flag was our alert. It wasn't for you. It was for us. It was to let us know our assets were at the gate, so we could come and escort them. It was a silent alarm. And you set it off and started screaming, painting a target on the two most high-value individuals in this terminal. Mike Sullivan looked like he was going to be physically ill. This was so much worse than a customer complaint. This was a national security incident. Agent Thompson turned to his partner. Reed, take the secondary bags. He turned to David and Eleanor. Sir, ma'am, we're ready. We'll bypass the jet bridge and take the secure vehicle on the tarmac. It's faster. No, David said, shaking his head. We're already late. We've caused enough of a scene. We'll board the plane. We just need to get to Geneva. Thompson nodded. As you wish. We will escort you to your seats. The agents picked up the rolling carry-ons. David and Eleanor held their own D-Pouch 7s. They began to walk toward the jet bridge. The crowd of passengers parted for them like the Red Sea. As they passed Brenda, Agent Reed paused. He was several inches taller than her, and he leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for her. We will be filing a formal complaint with Transatlantic Airlines Corporate, the FAA, and the State Department. This incident will be reviewed at the highest levels. Your conduct wasn't just unprofessional, it was dangerous. You put a target on a U.S. diplomat and interfered with a federal operation. You are a catastrophic liability. He didn't wait for a reply. He just turned and followed his team. Brenda Jenkins was left alone, standing at the podium. The silence was deafening. Every eye in the terminal was on her. She felt the weight of hundreds of stares, a crushing, physical force. She looked at her supervisor. Mike Sullivan's face was white with a fury she had never seen. Brenda, he said, and his voice was terrifyingly calm. Give me your cider badge, now. Mike, your badge, and your radio. Effective immediately, you are suspended, pending a full investigation. Get your things from your locker and meet me in my office. Do not speak to anyone. Do. You understand. Me? Numbly, Brenda unclipped her airport identification badge, the plastic card that gave her power, that made her somebody. It felt impossibly heavy in her hand. She handed it over. As she turned to walk away, a single passenger, a young man in a hoodie, started to clap. It was a slow, mocking clap. "Well done," he called out. "Great customer service." Brenda flinched as if struck. She hurried away, her face burning with a shame so profound it tasted like ash in her mouth. She had wanted to put them in their place, and in the end, she was the only one who had been put in hers. On the plane, the atmosphere was electric. The flight attendants, who had been alerted by the DSS team via the captain, were standing at rigid attention. "Ambassador Harris, Ms. Vance," the lead flight attendant murmured, her face pale. "Welcome aboard. Please, right this way. Can I take your bags, sir?" "Thank you, but no," David said, giving her a brief, tired smile. "These stay with us." They were escorted to seats 1A and 1C. As they settled in, David placed the olive duffel carefully at his feet, wedging it securely. Elena did the same with her black one. Agent Thompson and Agent Reed stood in the aisle, scanning the first-class cabin. "The captain sends his profound apologies, sir," Thompson said. "He was not aware of the situation until we contacted him from the ground." "It's not his fault, Agent," David said, loosening his collar. "It was an unfortunate personnel issue. Please let him know we are secure and ready for departure." "Will do, sir. We will remain at the door until the jet bridge is pulled. Have a safe flight. We'll have a team meeting you on the ground in Geneva." The agents nodded and moved back to the aircraft door, standing like silent sentinels. A few minutes later, the general boarding call was made. The first-class passengers, who had been forced to wait, filed on. Mrs. Davenport, the woman with the Louis Vuitton hat box, walked past. She saw David and Elena in their seats. She saw their cheap bags at their feet. She saw the federal agents standing guard. She quickly looked away, her face flushed, and hurried to her own seat. As the plane filled, a low murmur of conversation followed the boarding passengers. The story was spreading. "Did you see? They were diplomats. And my God, she tried to check their bags." High over the Atlantic, the cabin lights dimmed. Elena had her laptop open, the screen covered with a privacy filter. It was filled with lines of code. "She triggered the Level 7 alert, just as planned," Elena said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "But the noise she created was substantial." "It was," David agreed. He was reading a printed briefing, his face illuminated by a small overhead light. But the protocol worked. DSS was alerted. The bags were never compromised. "It's the why that bothers me, David," Elena said, pausing. "She didn't just see a bag. She saw us. And she made a judgment." David sighed, putting his papers down. He looked out the window at the endless dark. "I know, Elena. It's the part of the job they don't put in the manual. You can be an ambassador. You can be tasked with saving the global economy. But to some people, you'll always be just a guy with a cheap bag they need to put in his place." He was quiet for a moment. "It's tiring." "We're almost there," Elena said. "We'll rest in Geneva. Then we'll save the world. Then we can be tired." David smiled. "A sound plan." Back at JFK, the fallout was just beginning. Mike Sullivan was in his small, windowless office, his head in his hands. Across from him, Mr. Henderson, the Vice President of North American Operations for Transatlantic Airlines, was on speakerphone. His voice was a booming roar of pure, unadulterated rage. "Billions!" Henderson was shouting. "That's what our GSA contract for all government travel is worth, Sullivan. Billions with a B. And Brenda Jenkins, your employee, just put all of it in jeopardy." "Sir, I've suspended her." "Suspended?" "I just got off the phone with the legal team. They've been on a conference call with the State Department's legal counsel. They are furious. They're not just filing a complaint. They're talking about revoking our trusted carrier status. They're talking about fines for violating the Vienna Convention. We are firing her. We are firing her so hard her great-grandchildren will feel it. Is she there? She's outside, sir. Good. Don't let her in. Her security clearance is already revoked. Her cider badge is deactivated. She is banned from this airport. Banned for life. When you're done with this call, you will have airport security escort her from the property. Am I clear? Yes, Mr. Henderson. Crystal. And you, Sullivan. Henderson's voice dropped to a cold, menacing level. This happened on your watch. You knew she was a problem. I've seen her file. Complaints of rudeness, racial bias. You just warned her. You didn't fix it. Now it's a multi-million-dollar international incident. You'd better pray this blows over. Pray hard. The line clicked dead. Mike Sullivan sat in the buzzing silence, the adrenaline draining away, leaving him feeling cold and old. He picked up his radio and called airport security. Yeah, I need an escort for a terminated employee. Terminal 4, Operations Office. Her name is Brenda Jenkins. He then opened his email. The official report from the Department of State, Diplomatic Security Service, had already arrived. The subject line was chilling. Formal complaint. Interference with diplomatic mission and endangerment of U.S. personnel. TA-112. He was going to be up all night, and for many nights to come. Brenda Jenkins sat on a hard, unforgiving plastic chair outside Mike Sullivan's windowless office in the terminal's operations wing. The air was stale, thick with the smell of industrial carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. She had been there for 45 minutes, her entire body vibrating with a high, thin-wire taut dread. Ambassador, diplomatic pouch, federal agents, interference. The words looped in her mind, a frantic, repeating soundtrack to her own implosion. She had replayed the scene 1,000 times. The cheap bags, her laugh, step aside. Her moment of pure, venomous triumph when the screen flashed red. She had been so sure. She had known she was right. Her gut, the instinct that had guided her for 20 years, telling her who belonged and who didn't, couldn't be wrong. But it was. It had been catastrophically, career-endingly wrong. She had bet her entire life on a single, prejudiced assumption, and the cards had just been turned over. The door to Mike's office opened. He stood in the doorway, his face a grey mask of exhaustion and fury. He didn't look at her. He looked past her, into the hallway. "In," he commanded, his voice flat. Brenda scrambled to her feet, nearly tripping. "Mike, listen, I can explain. I didn't. Shut up, Brenda," he said, not unkindly, but with the finality of a judge passing sentence. "Just come in and shut the door." She entered. The office was tiny. A job well done plaque from 2015 hung crookedly on the wall. Mike's desk was overflowing with binders. He didn't sit. He stood by his chair, his hands braced on his desk, his knuckles white. "I just spent the last 45 minutes on a 3-way call with Airline Legal, our VP of North American Operations, and a preliminary counsel from the State Department," he said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "That's a new record for me." "Mike," she whimpered. "It was a mistake, a simple mistake. How was I supposed to—" "Stop," he held up a hand. "Just stop. Do you have any idea, any concept at all of what you've done? I was enforcing baggage policy." "You were not," he roared, slamming his palm on the desk so hard the plaque on the wall rattled. Brenda physically recoiled. "You were harassing passengers. You ignored procedure. Your one job, when you have a question, is to scan the passport. That's it. But you couldn't do that, could you, Brenda? You had to win. You had to put them in their place." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Well, congratulations. You did it. In doing so, you have interfered with a Level 7 diplomatic mission. You have endangered 2 United States government assets. You have violated a dozen federal and international protocols, including, and I am not making this up, the Vienna Convention. And you have single-handedly put our airline's multi-billion-dollar GSA contract for all government travel in jeopardy. So, yes, you won." "Oh my God," Brenda whispered. She sank into the visitor's chair, her legs giving out. "Get up," Mike snapped. "You are not a guest here. You are a liability. As of 3 minutes ago, your employment with Transatlantic Airlines is terminated. For cause." The words hit her, but they didn't register. Terminated? But my 20 years, my pension. 20 years, he laughed, a short, barking, joyless sound. Your 20 years of service were just erased by 30 minutes of catastrophic, prejudiced stupidity. Your pension is voided. Your health insurance expires at midnight. Your flight benefits are already deactivated. "Mike, please," she begged, the sobs finally breaking through. "This was real. This was happening. I have a mortgage. I have a car payment. You can't." "I can," Mike said, his face hardening as he picked up his desk phone. "You should have thought of your mortgage before you decided to play God at Gate B24. He dialed a 3-digit extension. "Security. Send the Port Authority escort to my office. The package is ready." He hung up and pointed to the door. "Get out." Brenda stumbled into the hallway, her vision blurred with tears. 2 Port Authority officers were already walking up. "Mike, please!" She tried one last time, her voice a desperate wail. Mike Sullivan just stepped inside his office and shut the door. The click of the lock was the sound of her life ending. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one of the officers said, his voice impassive. He wasn't unkind, but he was firm. I work here," she sobbed. "Not anymore, ma'am. We need to escort you from the property." Her walk of shame was a fresh, new hell. They didn't put her in cuffs, which was the only mercy she was shown, but they flanked her, one in front, one behind, as they walked her from the operations wing back into the main terminal. Every sound was magnified. The cheerful "Welcome to JFK" announcements over the PA system felt like a personal insult. The click-clack of roller bags on the terrazzo floor sounded like mocking laughter. She passed gate B22, where the crew for a flight to Orlando was gathering. She knew them all. She saw Jan, a gate agent she'd had lunch with just yesterday. Jan saw her police escort, and her eyes went wide with shock before she quickly looked down, busying herself with a printout. A passenger who had been at gate B24, a man in a business suit, saw her being led away. He pointed her out to his wife. "Look, that's her. That's the crazy agent." Brenda's face burned with a shame so profound it tasted like acid in her mouth. She, who had ruled this concourse. She, who had held the power of denied and approved. She was now just the crazy agent. They took her through the employee security checkpoint, a guard taking her SIDA badge and radio and tossing them unceremoniously into a grey plastic bin. She was now unsterile, a civilian. She was now the cattle. She was led to the employee bus stop, a concrete curb under a harsh sodium light. "Do not return to Port Authority property," the officer said, his voice flat. "If you do, you will be arrested for trespassing." He left her there. The bus to the employee parking lot arrived. She got on, her face streaked with tears and running mascara. The bus was silent. The few other employees on board either knew or they pretended not to see the woman in the back, her body shaking with great, gulping sobs. She got to her car, A 7-year-old Nissan she was still making payments on. She sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes, the silence of the car screaming at her. It was over. The next few days were a blur of denial and panic. She tried calling her union representative. He didn't pick up. She left a voicemail. An hour later, she received a text. "Sorry, Brenda. This is above policy. Interference with federal agents. We can't touch this. Good luck." Good luck. On the third day, desperate, she went online. She applied for a gate agent position at a rival airline. She filled out the long application, her hands shaking. She got to the section. "Have you ever been terminated from an airline position?" She checked. Yes. A new box appeared. Reason for termination. She stared at it. What could she write? Attitude? Customer dispute? She typed. Disagreement with management. She submitted the application. She didn't even have time to close the browser. A new page loaded instantly. "Thank you for your interest. At this time, we will not be moving forward with your application." It was an automatic, keyword-triggered rejection. She was blacklisted. The electronic wall was as high and as unyielding as the one she used to build at her gate. The final crushing blow came a week later. A certified letter arrived. It didn't look like a bill. It was thick. The return address was the U.S. Department of Justice, U.S. Attorney's Office, Eastern District of New York. Her hands, which had been trembling for a week, went completely numb. She tore it open. It was dense with legal language, but the message was clear. While the State Department was pursuing primary action through her employer, she was personally the subject of an ongoing federal investigation for willful interference with federal agents in the performance of their duties and endangerment of a diplomatic mission. They weren't pressing criminal charges yet. But the file was open. It would hang over her head, a sword of Damocles, for the rest of her life. Brenda Jenkins dropped the letter and slid to the floor of her kitchen. It was over. Her career, her reputation, her apartment, her future. She had lost it all, not in a single, grand explosion, but in a series of small, cruel, arrogant choices that had finally and permanently unraveled her entire life. 6 months had passed since the incident at JFK. Spring had arrived in Washington, D.C., and the cherry blossoms, in their fleeting, delicate arrogance, were painting the city in shades of white and pink. Inside the quiet, wood-paneled office of Ambassador David Harris, the atmosphere was one of measured calm. The flags of the United States and the State Department stood crisp and silent in the corners. The chaos of Gate B-24 felt like it was from another lifetime. His secretary announced a visitor. Mr. Henderson, the Vice President of North American Operations for Transatlantic Airlines, was shown in. He was visibly thinner than he had been on the frantic conference calls that night. His expensive suit hung a little loose, and his face was etched with the exhaustion of a man who had spent half a year in the crosshairs of federal lawyers. "Mr. Ambassador," Henderson began, his voice strained. He did not offer a handshake, sensing it would not be welcome. I'm here in person, on behalf of our entire executive board, to once again offer our most profound and unreserved apologies for the events of November 15th. He placed a thick, bound document on David's polished desk. The cover read, "Transatlantic Airlines, Special Training Mandate, Harris-Vance Protocol." "That," Henderson said, gesturing to the book, "is our new mandatory company-wide training protocol. It is a zero-tolerance policy on all forms of passenger profiling. It includes a new 8-hour, in-depth training module on cultural sensitivity, unconscious bias, and the proper identification of sensitive government and diplomatic credentials. Every single one of our 80,000 employees, from our CEO down to our new hire baggage handlers, is required to take and pass this course, or they are no longer employed by us. It's the new company Bible." David Harris looked at the document, but didn't touch it. "And this was voluntary?" Henderson let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Not exactly, sir. We were fined $1.8 million by the FAA for the security breach and violation of transport protocols. The Department of State, as you know, has placed our multi-billion-dollar General Services Administration contract on indefinite probation. We are being audited weekly. This mandate was part of the settlement to avoid further legal action and a full revocation of our trusted carrier status. We learned our lesson, sir. The hard way." "Good," David said, his voice flat. He finally leaned forward, clasping his hands on his desk. "It was never about me, Mr. Henderson, or Miss Vance. It wasn't about our feelings. It was about the catastrophic, rotting wood in the beams of the house prejudice that your employee felt so comfortable with. She acted on a bias that is rotting the foundations of the very civility we are supposed to represent. Her behavior didn't just inconvenience us, it could have compromised a mission critical to the stability of the global economy. All because she didn't like the look of our bags." David leaned back. "The real question I have, Mr. Henderson, is what happens to the people who don't have a diplomatic security team waiting for them? What happens to the soldier in his fatigues, or the college student, or the family just trying to get home when they meet someone like Brenda Jenkins? How many of them did she break, just a little bit, before she got to us?" Henderson looked down. He had seen the internal investigation. The answer was dozens. Brenda's file was a wasteland of minor passenger complaints, all with the same theme, all dismissed by supervisors. "As part of our internal review," Henderson said quietly, "we terminated 17 other employees and 4 supervisors, including Mike Sullivan, who were found to have patterns of similar, though less spectacular, behavior. We cleaned house, Mr. Ambassador." "And Miss Jenkins?" Elena Vance's voice asked. Henderson started. He hadn't seen her sitting in the chair by the window. She had been perfectly silent, observing. "Ah, Miss Vance," Henderson stammered, his face flushing. "My apologies. As you know, she was terminated that night. Her security clearances were revoked by the Port Authority and the FAA. She is blacklisted from all airline, aviation, and airport-adjacent industries. For life. From what our legal team has gathered, her life has completely unraveled. She lost her home. She's a pariah. No one will touch her." David Harris stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Washington Monument. He felt no pleasure, no victory, only a deep, profound weariness. "Karma isn't a person, Mr. Henderson," David said, his voice a low murmur. "It's not vengeful. It's just a ledger. It doesn't get angry. It just gets balanced. And it seems Miss Jenkins's account was deeply in the red for a very, very long time. Thank you for the update." The dismissal was clear. Henderson nodded, left the bound mandate on the desk, and showed himself out. The final entry on that ledger was written not in an office, but under the sickly, flickering fluorescent lights of a price-smart discount superstore in a rundown neighborhood in Queens. It was 10:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. The store smelled of stale popcorn, industrial disinfectant, and the faint, sweet smell of rotting fruit from the produce section. At Register 4, Brenda Jenkins was trying to stay awake. Her lower back throbbed. Her feet were swollen in her $15 sneakers. Her PriceSmart vest, a size too large, was stained with something sticky from a broken jar of salsa earlier in the day. Her name tag, Brenda, was crooked. Beep. 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 The sound was a form of torture. A young woman, a nurse in dark blue scrubs, pushed her cart forward. She looked exhausted. "Hi, how are you?" she asked, with the reflexive politeness of someone who also worked in a service job. Brenda didn't look up. "Cash or credit?" she mumbled. "Credit," the nurse said. She swiped her card. The machine let out a loud, obnoxious beep, beep, beep. "Declined. It's declined," Brenda said, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion. The nurse's face flushed bright red. "Oh my God, that's so weird. I just got paid. I know the money is in there. Can you try it again, please?" Brenda let out a heavy, put-upon sigh. The old, familiar reflex flared in her chest, a hot, bitter cocktail of impatience and scorn. "Can't you people ever have your—" She stopped the thought. She looked up, annoyed, ready to snap at the woman to get out of the line. And she froze. She caught her own reflection in the dark, greasy screen of her register. She saw, not the woman in charge, not the queen of Gate B24. She saw a pale, exhausted, middle-aged woman with lank, greasy hair, dead eyes, and a stained blue vest. She saw a person she herself would have stopped, a person she would have judged, a person she would have looked at with utter disdain. She saw a woman who looked like she carried cheap bags. The realization hit her like a physical blow, knocking the last bit of air from her lungs. This was it. This was the rest of her life. No power, no authority, no respect. Just the squeak of a bad cartwheel, the hum of the freezers, and the endless beep, beep, beep of other people's lives moving past her, one item at a time. "I'm so sorry," the nurse was saying, her voice trembling as she fumbled in her purse. I have cash. It's just, I'm so sorry to hold you up." The old Brenda would have voided the transaction, called a supervisor, and moved on. The new Brenda, the broken one, just let out a long, slow breath that sounded like dust. She couldn't even meet the nurse's eyes. "Take your time," Brenda mumbled, her voice hoarse. "It's fine, I'll wait." And she did. She had nowhere else to be. The ledger was finally balanced, and she was on the wrong side of it for good. And that's where Brenda's story ends. Not with a bang, but with the beep of a discount grocery scanner. It's a brutal reminder that prejudice and arrogance carry a heavy price. Brenda Jenkins judged two people by their cheap bags and lost her entire world, while the very people she mocked went on to save ours. The world is full of ambassadors in plain clothes. How we treat the person in front of us, regardless of what they wear or what they carry, is the truest test of our own character. Brenda failed that test. What did you think of this story? Do you believe the karma she received was justified? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories where arrogance is met with unforgettable consequences, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to the channel for more true life drama every week. You never know who you're talking to. Thanks for watching.